Our first witness this morning is to be known as Simon, is he?
Sir, yes, Simon Hamilton.
Please state your full name.
My name is Simon Jonathan Hamilton.
And take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth. Sorry.
Simon, you suffer from haemophilia A.
Yes.
How is the severity of your haemophilia classified?
It's classified as mild haemophilia A.
Now, at various times in your childhood and young adulthood, you were given first cryoprecipitate and then later factor VIII products.
Yes.
From the description you give in your witness statement, lots of bumps and scrapes as a child and as a young man.
Yes, I tried very hard. My parents are very careful about trying to keep us healthy and safe, to avoid contact sports and all sorts of issues relating to the dangers and risks that would lead to bleeds because of the problems that we were aware of and some of our greater family had. But nevertheless, it's inevitable, and I ended up requiring quite a lot of treatment at times.
And you've a recollection of being given cryoprecipitate on a number of occasions, and then from about 1976 onwards, factor products, specifically cryobulin and then at some stage haemophil.
Yes, absolutely. One of the reasons why I do remember the difference, because the cryo was very visually different. It was almost like a plasma, and you had to receive it over a period of time. I remember the haemophil because we got very large injections, I think 50 ml injections, and to boys of my age at the time, a 50 ml injection was a wonderful weapon with water in it. So I do remember distinctly the treatments that I received.
And one of the recollections that you describe in your witness statement was playing a five-a-side football match, and you were leg checked.
Yes.
And a large hematoma developed, and you were given either cryoprecipitate or factor VIII products.
Yes, that was a significant bleed in my thigh.
You've not, I think, been able to ascertain precisely what you were given prior to 1976, because your records, your medical records, prior to 1976 are missing.
Yes, I don't have any records prior to 1976, unfortunately. I might make some reference to that later on.
That live feed's not a good...
Now, were your parents, whilst you were a child, or you whilst you were a young adult, ever given any information or advice or warnings about any risks of infection associated with the use of these products?
No, definitely not.
Now, we can see from a later entry in your records, and we'll put it up on the screen in front of you, Simon, it's 2339008. And we'll see a reference in this letter to abnormal liver function tests. So we can see it's a letter 6 of June 2003, but if we go to the last paragraph on that page, he developed abnormal liver function tests in 1984. Do you recall any discussion with you in or around 1984 about those abnormal liver function tests or their significance?
No.
In 1985, your records show that you were tested for what was then referred to as HTLV3 HIV. And if we have up on screen 2339006, please. We can see the bottom entry is dated the 7th of June 1985. And there's a reference there to HTLV3 tested. And then if we have up on screen, please, 2339009. We can see here, Simon, a letter dated the 4th of July 1985 from Dr. Main to you, saying the results of your recent blood tests have now come to hand. I'm pleased to inform you that all is well and they're negative. What can you recall about the process of being asked about HIV testing and given information about it?
At the time, there was a flurry of concern, it appeared to be, from the haematology unit that there were problems with some of the treatments that we'd received, and it wasn't very clear, but I was made aware that that we had the option of being tested, for HIV if we wished. At the time, my brother and myself both recollected, we were a little startled that that was an option, because I think even at that stage there was a significant amount of information about the risks and the negativity, the stigma, and that's probably not a strong enough word, about having HIV or being vulnerable to it. And as a consequence of that, I would have been, and I'm still surprised when I reflect, that I might have had a choice to find out whether or not that was something I might have been infected with. The consequences, obviously, for lots of people around me would have been significant. If I had not chosen to confirm whether or not I was infected, regardless of the impacts on me, which would have been significant emotionally, physically, and in terms of social opportunity as well, they would have been very significant. So it would have been madness not to want to be tested, and irresponsible, and therefore I was staggered that that was something which was offered as an option.
Do you have any recollection of a meeting at the Royal Victoria Hospital with Dr. Main or others at which these issues were discussed?
I do recall a meeting that we were brought to. I remember on that particular day, that one of the reasons why I remember it, sometimes it's little things which click the memory and which hook the memory. I do remember there were a significant number of haemophiliacs there, and we were all presented with some information about the risks or the possibility, rather, that we had been infected and that we would be tested if we wished. I remember at the time too, because my brother and I, we didn't take part in contact sports. We rowed. My parents had endeavoured to get us into a school where we could be physically fit, because that would have helped us, but avoided the risks of playing rugby or football or anything else where we would have been likely to lead to injury and treatment. And I remember at the time thinking just how fortunate we were, because I saw lots of my fellow sufferers who had significant problems with their joints and bleeds and had been more heavily impacted upon. So I do remember that quite clearly, yeah.
Now, you've seen Dr. Main's statement in relation to this, and I'm just going to read out a very short passage from her statement, which I know you've seen. It says, it was decided that all patients who had received factor treatment, whether in the form of cryoprecipitate or freeze-dried concentrate, should be offered testing for HIV. Patients and their relatives were invited to a succession of meetings to update them on all known risks and information about the virus. The meetings took place between January and March of 1985 at the Royal Victoria Hospital. Patients were invited to be tested. It was a matter of choice whether they wished to do so. No one was compelled to participate.
That would be consistent with my memory and my shock.
Now, it was some years later when you were told that you had been infected with hepatitis C. What can you recall about being informed that you had hepatitis C?
I recall being brought in, and at the time there was a similar arrangement, I gathered, talking to colleagues, to fellow sufferers, that people were being pulled in, brought in, invited in, and asked to undergo tests and so forth. When I was told that I had hepatitis C, I was deeply concerned. I didn't understand what that meant, really, except that I realized it wasn't good. I realize now what it means.
Do you consider that the information that was provided to you at the time was sufficient in terms of what you were told about the nature of the condition, its prognosis, and so on?
No, I don't feel that I had a very full picture, and that may well have been because the medical professions were still learning what this meant. I remember at one stage the potential of the virus, or the virus as it was identified as non-A, non-B. So we were part of that learning process, I guess.
Now, you've drawn attention to a test result in your records, and we'll put that up on screen. It's 2339004. And we can see it's hepatitis C virus positive. The date's not clear on this copy, but my understanding from your legal representative's scrutiny of the records that it's dated the 8th of October 1990.
Yeah.
As far as you're concerned, when were you told that you had been infected with hepatitis C?
It's pretty clear from my records, as I can see, that I was informed about 4 years later.
4 years later, 1994.
Yeah.
And we'll just look at another entry from your records. It's 2339010, please. And we can see here, first of all, there's a handwritten entry, 25th of March 1994. Various dates there given. There's a reference to December 1984. And then if you look down, 1990 test HCV POS. And then if we look to the next entry, please, which is the 18th of April 1994, towards the bottom of the page, we can see their reference, brief and difficult discussion. And then a few lines further down, it says, Simon very worried, re HCV, etc. As far as you're concerned, is that roughly the time when you learnt that you had hepatitis C?
Yes, and me knowing me, for me to be described as being, for there to have been a brief and difficult discussion, and for me to have been very worried, if I had been aware in 1990, I would have been exactly the same.
And you've said in your statement that you're quite a placid character, that's your term, and that if your doctors described you as worried, that shows the level of distress
I
that
would
you
be
were
respectful
experiencing.
to the medical profession because they have helped me and guided me and kept me alive. And I value that, just as I'm aware too that I have been infected with something which will potentially kill me, could kill me, has had a massive impact on my life, and will continue to have. And I've seen the impact it has had on others. So I'm very aware of that. But yes, so while I would be calm and placid, I'm passionate, and while I would be respectful, I'm also honest and clear about issues of responsibility and my feeling about that. And therefore, if I was concerned or distressed or worried, there would be good cause.
Now, having been given the diagnosis and been given some information about the condition, your family members were tested and tested negative, but
Yes.
nonetheless that was a process
Yes.
that you felt that they should go through. Up until the time at which you started a number of years later your first course of treatment,
Yeah.
what physical or other symptoms did you experience in consequence of the hepatitis C?
One of the things I've learned about hepatitis C is that it impacts everybody in a different way, just as the treatments cause different reactions. And really, it was part of a journey. And on that journey, sometimes it's only when you get towards the end of a journey that you realize what the journey has really been like, because you've been in the middle of it. And I realized after I had been cured, after the virus was suppressed, that I had been living a life, remarkably for me, very active, but very tired and worn and drained. And I just thought it was the nature of the life that I led. But in reality, I would have been probably living on a percentage of my normal energy. So, and that's common to all. I had jaundice at one stage. I would have been prone to infections and things like that. But weariness and tiredness and some discomfort in my liver.
Now, a number of years after your diagnosis, in April 2010, you underwent a FibroScan, and we'll just put up on screen, please, 2339005. And we'll see there a letter dated the 23rd of April 2010, and it explains in the first paragraph, Mr. Hamilton attended me on the 21st of April for his FibroScan. It refers to the study yielding a score of 26.6, and although the interquartile range was quite wide, all of the readings were very consistent with an advanced level of fibrosis or cirrhosis. In light of the various bits of clinical and radiological information available to me, I have told Mr. Hamilton that I am in no doubt that he has liver cirrhosis. And then it goes on to say that he emphasised that you seem to have very well compensated cirrhosis. And you were at that point enrolled on the hepatoma surveillance programme. What does that entail?
I was placed on the surveillance programme effectively, and I'm very grateful to be on it. I'm very grateful for what happens through that process. It's like an early warning system. Effectively, because of the nature of the cirrhosis, it destroys and damages the liver. Because of the hepatitis C, the liver is gradually degraded, and as a consequence of that, the liver then develops severe scarring, and that scarring is what actually impacts on the performance of your liver, and that ultimately leads, if it's not put in check, to you dying, developing a cancer, tumours, etc., and then requiring a new liver if you're fortunate enough to get one, and you're fortunate enough to survive the experience, and you're fortunate enough to make a good recovery, because there's no given in any of that. As a consequence of sorry, I've just gone off my thought.
That's all right. I was asking you about the surveillance programme.
I beg your pardon, yes. As a consequence of all of those things, then the liver can deteriorate. And when I was put on this regime, it ensures that there's an early warning as to whether or not my degraded liver, because it is degraded, and this part of it here is not good, that will then be looked at and monitored very carefully every 6 months to determine whether or not there's evidence of a tumour. That process happens because you go and you get an ultrasound. You also give a test, you have a blood test. The blood test over a period of time will indicate if there's a change in some of the proteins. That would indicate whether there was a risk, an increased risk. It's usually a very good identifier of cancer. The scan, if the scan identifies any shadow, then there's a second observation, that usually happens, and I wait with bated breath to see whether the radiographer will call a second radiographer. The second radiographer has come in twice, and on one occasion we thought that we actually were going to be told we had cancer, that I had cancer, we had cancer, that I had cancer. It would affect us all, so effectively that we had cancer. Thankfully that wasn't the case, but there have been nodules identified on that portion of my liver. The monitoring ensures that at an early stage, if they find something, then there's a confirmation with an MRI scan. I've had 2 of those so far. The MRI scan is a very detailed way of identifying just the nature of what that shadow is, and what it's likely to be. And in cases like mine, it would be preferred not to have a biopsy of the liver because of the bleeding dangers. In fact, it's really not something that is done very often for haemophiliacs unless there's an emergency of some sort. So that would be the purpose of that. And that's something which I will receive every 6 months for life, or until I die.
And that's been ongoing since 2010?
That's been ongoing since then.
So every 6 months you undergo this screening and tests.
Yeah.
And you've described very powerfully in your statement not only the gratitude for being on the programme, but also the effect it has on you in terms of waiting every 6 months to find out whether anything has gone wrong.
Yeah, I really can quote from the professionals rather than myself, in the sense that the significance of the test means that I'm good for another 6 months. That's encouraging for 6 months, but it means that there's a natural impact on preparing yourself for what might not be good news. Whether that would ever be the case or not is a side effect, or a side issue. The reality is that I'm on this scheme because they're looking for cancer. Otherwise, I wouldn't be on the scheme. So that's the reality. And while I'm very grateful, the impacts on all of us are that we're not sure, and we wait to hear. And there is, one builds a threshold for these things, but the reality is that all the time you are very glad to hear that the protein test is good, that the scan is good, and when you've done enough of these, you can read the radiographers. You can tell whether there's a problem or not, or whether you need to be anxious. And the truth is, when they go out of the room to check with somebody else, I get up and look at the scan. Now, I'm not a radiographer, and I can't tell, but I'm anxious to see if I can see anything. So those are the residual impacts.
Now, also in 2010, you underwent your first course of treatment in relation to the hepatitis C. You had interferon and ribavirin, and we can see that 2339007. It's a more recent letter, but it contains a summary in the italicised numbered paragraphs at the beginning of the letter. Paragraph 3, first treatment of hepatitis C, finishing December 2010, PCR negative at the end of treatment, but relapsed. What can you recall about that first course of treatment, Simon?
Well, I had to brace myself to go through it again, let's put it that way. The treatment is very severe. It has an immediate impact. What I do recall, and I recall this on both occasions because I had the second treatment as well, which I'm very grateful for. I recall within a few minutes of getting the injection, of taking the injection, I developed it's almost like malaria. We had the fire on, we had the stove on, and at the same time, I was shaking uncontrollably and feeling wretched, and that's common to the treatment. The treatment, I would say, was severe, but I suppose in layman's terms, you almost have to kill someone to make them better, because there are a number of impacts. Those impacts are hard. They leave you very tired. Your platelets deteriorate considerably. So you're quite vulnerable. Your immune system is shut down in order to attack the virus. And it's very clever technology, very clever medical technology, but at the same time, it takes its toll. I wasn't able to continue working for periods of time. I struggled on because that's my nature as far as I could, but there were times when we just had to stop and rest. But I was impacted quite severely. I'll never forget the surprise at how quickly I was in a sort of a malaria state. And
initially it seemed as though this first course of treatment had cleared the virus, but then you discovered on further testing that it hadn't, or it had come back.
Yes.
Relapsed is the phrase used in this letter.
Yeah.
What was the impact of that on you?
Well, I was glad I'd had a go at it. I hoped it would work, and we were very encouraged when we got the readings during the process that the virus was being suppressed, because at least that meant that during that period of time, the treatment was giving the liver a chance to recover whatever would happen. However, to find that the genes, in layman's terms, woke up again was a hard blow. It was a hard blow, and I dealt with it manfully and accepted it, and my wife was very supportive and very strong.
In 2013, you embarked upon a second course of treatment.
Yeah.
There was some difficulties you describe in your witness statement in being able to access that treatment. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for a period of time, treatment was provided and supported. There was a cooperation or a coordination, a collaboration between the hepatology department in the Royal Victoria and the haematology department in the City Hospital, and I received treatments in the city. By agreement, I understand. Therefore, I was able to get all my treatment there rather than going to the Royal Victoria, to the hepatology unit. But my haematology consultant was very clear that I needed to get that treatment and as soon as possible to give me a chance. And when I see what happened to my brother, I'm very glad. I'm very grateful for that. Excuse me. And I have to say, I have the ultimate respect for Dr. Benson because he went beyond what most people would do to, and has done, to provide me with as much support as possible. And he ensured that I got a treatment which worked the second time. Otherwise, I may have had to wait. I would have had to wait for probably another couple of years. And the impact of that on my liver, having seen what happened to my brother, frightens me.
So that second course of treatment cleared the virus.
It did, thank God.
Did you experience similar side effects?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did indeed. Sometimes it's a little bit, and I talk to people, I'm a church elder, and I talk to some of my parishioners sometimes in my district. I provide support for them. And people who've been through cancer treatment once, then sometimes relapse and have to go through it again. And, it's difficult to say to them, well, this is, we've got to be strong. And there are trite things you can say, but at the end of the day, everyone knows when they've been through something once, they kind of know what they're facing again. Again, we did that as a family, manfully, united, boldly, and we're grateful for the opportunity.
Now, you experienced various physical health consequences related to some extent to either the hepatitis C or the treatment.
Yeah.
You had a brain hemorrhage.
Yeah, that was quite a scary moment. I had a brain hemorrhage. It wasn't long after the treatment. It was a short time after the treatment, and I'd recovered from the treatment reasonably well. But I was aware that there were potential side effects because the treatment is so severe. It has to be to do what it does, and of course, one runs the gauntlet of these things rather than one doesn't. We have a natural instinct to survive. So if the opportunity is there to receive the treatment, we take it rather than saying, oh no, I'm not going to do that because of whatever. And therefore we know that while we're doing that, we're taking the chance. The impact of the brain hemorrhage was very severe. My wife has been very strong. And I love her very much. And she has, she's been with me through many, many experiences, and some of them have been very severe. And those were severe experiences. And she has always been a tower of strength. And she has never ever shown me her worry. She's carried that bravely herself, and that's an impact, and bound to be an impact on her. But during the time of the brain hemorrhage, when I was really very ill, I caught a glimpse of her, and she was crying in the arms of a friend who'd come to help us as well through the first night of in the emergency ward. And I realised at that point, when I saw her crying, for me, I realised this is a very serious moment. I'm in serious difficulty, and I have to say, I did prepare and accept. I made my peace because I thought I wasn't going to get through that. But I believed I might. But for the first time in my life, I actually know what it feels like to accept that you might die and to be willing to do that.
You've been left with high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And also associated potentially with your infection or the treatment for it, you experienced spasms in the gallbladder leading to the removal of your gallbladder.
Yeah, there seemed to be a reaction there, which was monitored very carefully, and we held our breath on that one until after the treatment finished, because to have the surgery, which was necessary, before the end of the treatment would have destroyed the possibility of having the treatment. We couldn't risk that, so we balanced one against the other, and then I had the gallbladder removed after that.
Now, you've told us about the ongoing scans and the impact of that upon you. I just wanted to read, if I may, one short passage from your witness statement and ask if there's anything you wanted to add to what you've already said. You say in your witness statement this: "I live my life on a basis of 6 months at a time, as I have tests every 6 months to check whether or not I have cancer on my liver. The hospital has given me a reassurance that I will be eligible for a liver transplant until the age of 70. This is one of the main reasons why I try and keep myself so fit and active. After that, if I develop cancer, they've given me no hope of a transplant at this stage. That's a lot to deal with when you are being checked every 6 months and know that your liver has bad scarring."
Yeah. When one is faced with one's potential termination date, it's quite a thing. When you're faced with issues which relate to your own mortality, you think about life and you think about death differently. And I sometimes reflect on those issues, not only in terms of how I might feel, but also in terms of how those impacts would be on my family. And there I share the pain and feel the importance of speaking for those who aren't here. And there are many, not only in Northern Ireland, but also in England, Wales and Scotland. We are a community of sufferers. And we have to fight for our voice to be heard, and we've waited for 40 years. And we've had one report, and we've had one inquiry, and now we have an inquiry that we have confidence in. Thank you, sir. And it's been a long wait, and I feel for those other people very much.
Within your own family, and without mentioning at this stage any names, you've had 2 cousins die.
Yeah, I have.
In consequence of infection through blood products.
Yes, I have. That's hard. That's hard to deal with. It's hard to face. I empathise with their families deeply. I look at my son and my family, and I think what life would be like without me, what I would be, what I would not have and not have had the opportunity to have, and what they would be without. And I realise that the trauma that lots of the community feel when they have those bereavements, the impacts of all of that on their lives and on the lives of their relatives is immeasurable. Because when people are not well, when people are affected with loss and affected with the traumas that we go through in the everyday experience of our lot, that we can make decisions which are life-changing decisions. They can take us in different directions, and many people have, and many people do. And I empathise with them for the difficulty of those situations, and sometimes the tragedy they find themselves in, which was no fault of their own, and no fault, as in being contaminated, no fault of mine. And at the end of the day, the impacts are enormous. If you throw a stone into a pond, and it ripples as it does and splashes as it does, then everything around it has effect.
You've spoken in your statement of how for years you realise you've bottled up your feelings and you're only now beginning to deal with the impact of that.
Yes.
And you are now receiving some form of psychological support.
Yeah.
That's of recent origin, is that right?
Yes, it is. It is. I realised that when the first of the Belfast meetings was back July a year ago, I believe, and I attended that meeting, and it was the first time I'd been in the company of fellow sufferers, and I left the meeting. I went to the meeting feeling fine. I left the meeting not feeling fine, actually took a day off work. I thought I'd got a virus, an ordinary virus. I thought I wasn't well. I felt sick and just weary, and it cleared. And then I began to realize that I was getting emotionally upset, and so forth. And when I was up at the clinic for one of my visits, I had some. We have a very good team up there in the city hospital, and I was talking to the social worker, and I was given. She felt that I could benefit from support, and I spoke to the consultant Gary, and I was emotionally upset with both of them, and I realised that yes, just as in bereavement, and I see this a lot in bereavement, and I've experienced it in my own bereavements that I've had, and I see it in the general suffering that haemophiliacs and von Willebrand sufferers and those who've been transfused, how they all suffer. We're damaged people. We have lots of trauma, and we tend to bottle that up as human beings. I describe it as a cylinder with a lid on it, and sometimes that lid comes off. It comes off in terms of certain catalysts when people are emotionally affected out of bereavement. We can't explain why it happens, but the feelings inside the cylinder are real. They're very real. They don't change. They don't go away. And similarly, I realized that I'd just been traumatized by the experiences that I'd had, and not all of them, all of them rather, all of my haemophilia experiences, as well as the contaminated blood issues, which are significant for me. And I just realized that I needed some support, and I've been getting that support. I'll be going again tomorrow morning for that support. And that has been very beneficial in helping me to address and deal with the obvious issues which I had shut away. And I realised that my fellow sufferers and my fellow, the infected and the affected, all have the same issues, and it's under the surface. This is like an iceberg. You have the issues on the surface, and they're the ones you can see, and there are all the other issues under the surface which have an impact on everyone's life over years. And it's very hard to measure that, but it is very real.
And the treatment that you've been receiving, or the support and assistance you've been receiving, that's following your own initiative in the latter part of last year. Was any form of counselling or psychological or therapeutic support made available to you in the years before that? No,
there wasn't, no. I did note in my records that at one stage, some time ago, I was given some counselling in relation to hepatitis C, and I would contest that. I'm receiving professional counselling now, and I can see what that means. At that stage, I had a conversation.
Well, let's just look at one of those entries. You're right that your records refer to hepatitis C counselling from time to time. If we have up on screen 2339011, and we'll have the first paragraph, please. So this is a letter from Dr. Main, and it says, the above mildly affected haemophiliac patient attended on the 3rd of February for counselling regarding his hepatitis C infection. The counselling that's described in that first sentence, Simon, was what?
A conversation. It was a conversation. I mean, it was clear at the time, and it's clear from the preamble of my records and everything else that I was really quite unaware of the consequences of this, as I believe to some extent the medical professionals were as well. So counselling, I'm getting counselling now. I wasn't getting counselling then.
And if we just look briefly at the rest of this paragraph, it says this: 98% of all haemophiliacs worldwide who were treated with blood products during or before 1985 are positive for hepatitis C infection. 60% will continue to have chronic disease, although they may well be asymptomatic. Depending on their viral subtype, they may respond to treatment with alpha interferon. A small percentage will go on to develop cirrhosis and/or hepatocellular carcinoma. Now, this is a letter about you, but sent by Dr. Main to a GP. Do you recall whether those statistics, those figures, those consequences were ever discussed with you?
No, we never had that kind of conversation, no.
What is the date of that letter?
The date of that letter, sir, is the 8th of March, 1995.
Okay.
Can I ask you a little more, Simon, about some of the other impacts that your infection or your treatment has had upon you?
Yeah.
You've made reference in your statement to issues relating to dental treatment. What can you
Yes.
tell us about that?
Yes, well, one of the witnesses yesterday resonated what I had experienced as well. The initial stigma relating to having the hepatitis virus was significant within my experience across other departments, not the departments that I was working with daily or experiencing on a regular basis, i.e. the haematology unit. They were very clear and very supportive, and they didn't treat us as if we were different. But my experience with the School of Dentistry was, well, again, I'm a passionate person, and I have a sense of justice, and I felt dirty, unclean, guilty of something I hadn't done because of the reaction of other professionals there who simply refused to take x-rays. I accepted the fact that the staff who were working with me had to gown up and cover themselves and seal every possible access point, but at the same time, when it came to getting an x-ray, we waited long periods of time, and in the end, on more than one occasion, the visible frustration of the dentist when he said to the staff, I will take the x-ray instead. So the dentist actually took the x-ray on occasions. Now, we were angry about that. I felt I could draw historical similarities. Across history, there have been situations where people have been stigmatized and identified for unjust reasons, and I felt very much in that category. And I know that lots of other haemophiliacs who were receiving treatment felt the same way because that was the way we were treated. That changed. And it changed probably because of a number of voices, but nevertheless, I didn't like feeling that way. It made me very cross and angry, and as a young man, it made me very angry because I couldn't see any justice in it. I felt as if people looked at me and treated me as if I had been an alcoholic, as if I had willfully brought illness upon myself, and that is simply not the truth.
In terms of other ways in which the infection or treatment affected your life, what impact was there on your employment?
Well, I was very fortunate, and I seem to have been one of the very few people who've been fortunate in this, in that my employers were supportive of me. Initially, in the first number of years, I worked in higher education for a number of years in the Republic of Ireland as well as here, and I kept my health issues to myself. Because like a lot of others, I felt that people didn't understand, and there were stigmas, and I was aware that when I was initially open about this, that there was a reaction to me, and as a normal human being, I didn't like that, so I decided to keep that to myself. Later in life, I decided that was time to stand up and be counted, and I have not made a secret of it at all. And as the chair of the Haemophilia NI group, charity here in Northern Ireland, we are endeavouring to ensure that we provide support as far as we can, and encouragement and advocacy for those who would be in a similar situation, suffering from infected blood and so forth, but feel that they can't identify who they are. That's wrong.
And your employers have allowed you to take time off work when you've needed to.
They've been very supportive.
And generally been supportive.
Yeah.
The impact on your family, you've touched upon already the impact upon your wife. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the impact upon your wife or son?
Yeah, well, the truth is that there are some areas that even people who are very, very, very close don't spend a lot of time dwelling on. We've never had an in-depth discussion about how we feel about those issues. We've never really gone to the end of that discussion. I just know that my wife is always there for me. My son is always there for me. But I see in them, and I don't know, because my wife, as I've said, is a very strong woman. So inevitably, she has carried the stress and strain of my little journey. My son has also been impacted. I know, certainly after the brain hemorrhage, that I would drive Ethan to work. We work not far from each other. And if I appear stressed, or Ethan would observe very quickly if even in the car, if I seem a bit stressed, I sigh sometimes. And I sigh because when I'm thinking through things, and the sighing is part of that process. But he would be very aware. Are you okay, Dad? Is everything all right? So the trauma of the impacts on my health have been there, and the periods of weariness and being unwell, and the tests and all of that. That it's hard to measure.
And there's a particular burden that you've described your mother feeling.
Yes, my mother had a relative who of two other folk who were infected, cousins of ours who sadly passed away as a consequence of this process of suffering and infection. And my mother and their mother would share the guilt. Mothers carry the guilt. And I'd say every mother carries some guilt in their own mind for that, for the fact that their children have haemophilia, never mind that they've been infected. And that's something which a mother, and sons are sons and mothers are mothers, and mothers have a special something, and for them the burden of guilt is considerable. My mother's 85, and she still feels that guilt, and she can quantify it and qualify it very clearly. Of course, we say, look, don't be ridiculous, and you know, we've had good lives, and we've been very fortunate, and everyone has rough and tumble, so you know, you've got to get up and get on, and she would be positive, but that scar is there. It's like a brand.
Simon, you've touched on your role as the chair of Haemophilia Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And in that capacity, you have a broader experience, other than solely your own,
Yes.
of both issues relating to the availability of treatment and care, and issues relating to the availability of financial assistance.
Yes.
And I understand there are some observations that you would like to make in that respect.
Yeah, I would, if you don't mind. I could keep those to the end, because I had one or two public and private observations I wanted to make, but if you'd like me to say something about that now, I will.
Well, Simon, I think we're pretty much at the end of my questions, so
sorry.
please feel free to say what it is you would like to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I will touch on that. Yes, I've first of all a few personal observations I'd like to make. For me, the theme of a substantial gap between developing a health issue, as in hepatitis, and being told that I had been diagnosed causes me concern. I work in a profession where transparency is essential. I work with compliance and qualifications in education. I'm responsible for licenses. I'm responsible for tracking and for confirming, and I'm responsible for measuring risk. So in the consequence of all of that, I can transpose some of those thoughts and experiences into my medical experience. And I have trouble with the fact that I had to wait for a long period of time. 4 years to me seems a long time while my liver was bubbling away. I also feel that not being upfront about my health status, and the fact that I was being observed, monitored, and potentially treated or prepared for treatment causes me some concern, since it's my health. I would like to be involved in that process, and I think that is reflected in my understanding of lots of my family of contaminates, the community of contaminated people. I think transparency is a very important issue. We're getting transparency now. But for a long period of time, there was no transparency. So the people who were suffering were the people who didn't know, and everybody else knew. That wouldn't be acceptable in the playground. It wouldn't be acceptable anywhere else. And I feel like I was the last to know, despite my fundamental right to that information. Many of my records were destroyed. That's another issue which I have some concern with. And I understand that there are reasons why records are destroyed. However, I would say that people who suffer from a blood disorder are high risk. They're treated throughout their lives as high risk. Billions of dollars, billions of pounds have been spent in research and in pharmaceutical technology to ensure that those people are treated properly, to match the difficulties that they have, and yet it's not important enough to keep their records. I find that unacceptable. And I would hope that out of this, some form of retention of records would be a clear principle of practice across the whole medical profession. I've been a haemophiliac all my life. I'm 58. If I have a problem now that might in some way be informed by medical records prior to 1976, and those aren't available and can't be found, then I would say I'm put at a disadvantage, and so are the professionals dealing with me. And therefore, I think that's something which really should be one of the outcomes of this process. I know myself, in terms of record keeping and preparing things for regulators, that that there is a process and procedure in place. We have to retain thousands, hundreds of thousands of records at work. However, we do that by scanning and so forth, so the technology is there. But the principle of practice is important, and I would hope that that would happen. And I gather we have worked with it. My brother had a problem, and as a consequence of that, with his finding his records, as a consequence of that, we set up a meeting with the trust and with the support of our legal team to try and fast track the access to medical records for the benefit of all of our community, because that has been a problem. And we've had a couple of meetings, and we have more planned, and those are very fruitful meetings with the trust, and we find them very helpful and welcome those and their willingness to support that. However, issues around finding medical records and accessing them is a difficult one, and it has been difficult, and in some cases the records are not available. And I just find in cases where there are high-risk patients who have lifelong problems, that this is something which it seems pretty obvious that needs to be addressed as a matter of practice. In terms of some public observations, yes, as the chair of Haemophilia NI, we try to advocate for all sufferers, all haemophiliacs in Northern Ireland. Some join our society, others work with the UK Society. I have very good relationships with them. I have a lot of respect for those people. We're all part of the same team, doing the same job as best we can, and we interact very well together. I also have that relationship with Wales and Scotland, Haemophilia Wales and Haemophilia Scotland. We'd be on the phone a lot. You would imagine at the moment we're on the phone a lot. But we work together and collaborate on other things. As a chair of the society, and our society decided, because of the we were working and developing before the contaminated blood inquiry, but we decided when that came up, we would do our best to represent haemophiliacs, and then we threw that more open, and we have a subgroup which my brother Nigel runs, helps to manage, and that is to give everyone who has been contaminated, everyone who has been infected or affected, the opportunity to get together, and then we try to facilitate that process. And Nigel manages that very ably, and lots of people have contributed to that, people who are being heard here in Northern Ireland and others whose statements you have. We feel that's very important, and that role of advocacy is very important, and that role of advocacy has taken me on into other areas, and I've tried to do that because fundamentally those of us who are here will get some closure on this process. I cannot let go of the thought of those who had that experience alone and are no longer here. I can't shake that sense of loss and their sense of fear for what lay ahead. And therefore we will do all we can to support this inquiry and to continue, if we don't get satisfaction, to continue to find a solution which is satisfactory. But we do have great confidence in this inquiry and the integrity of those who are managing it. As just a couple more things I'd like to say. In that role, I've been struck by the trauma on all the individuals. And it's important to stress those who've been infected and affected. It's very easy to forget and as life goes on, but we in the community of sufferers live with this every day. I have less problems than others. I certainly don't see myself as a massive sufferer in comparison with other people. There are loss of life impacts and the mental and emotional strains which people carry with them. And it's obvious from the way in which the hearings are being held that there are those who are still afraid to reveal their identities, and I totally respect and understand that, and I'm very glad that they have the courage to speak. In terms of the economic damage that has been done to sufferers, that's significant. The opportunity to work potentially is denied because of ill health. Access to support in terms of the benefits schemes is constantly under attack. I know we hear a lot about the current changes in the process which are being impacted on individuals. I'm not aware of any positive impacts, so that says something about policy. And in terms of the determination of government, not to lead to a solution to our problem, but to feed the disparity. And I've said really here, I've tried to put this into words, the government's determination not to lead on a solution, but to feed disparity at the trough of devolution is where we stand at the moment. We're in a situation where myself and a number of campaigners across the United Kingdom met together, got together, a lot of damaged people. We have worked very hard together, and amazingly, because of the trauma which we all suffer, we have been united, and that in itself is an achievement, and it's a very positive achievement, and we continue to be united. We have met David Lidington and the Junior Minister for Health, Jackie Doyle-Price, in London. We pressed for a parity of support, of financial support, because Scotland had moved ahead with that process first, and rightly so, and the rest of the home countries were left behind. The one thing that we're pressing for now, and I've had meetings here in Northern Ireland with very supportive senior civil servants who are trying to work through this situation. I'm not in any way knocking their effort, but time has a habit of rolling on when government does things, and people unfortunately carry the impact. And I would urge the government, and I would urge the different regional governments to think very carefully about the nature of the letter which Sir Brian wrote, going back to October, I believe. That letter requested and required and asked for the governments to recognise that people had the right to live, I quote, rather than exist through the process of the inquiry, because the inquiry is traumatic. And in relation to that parity, we find ourselves now in a situation where the government has moved in one region, so we have greater disparity. Scotland and England have greater disparity. Wales and Northern Ireland continue to be at the back of the queue. And the people that I try to represent through the society, and those who are with other organisations, other charities, but are still part of the group which we meet, I'm aware from them of the difficulties and hardships. And really, I'm not here, and we're not here to determine responsibility and liability. But what is clear, that's the responsibility of the public inquiry, which I believe it will do very ably. But what I would say is there is a responsibility, and it's a responsibility in government. And responsibility doesn't matter whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a manager, whether you're an employee. Responsibility means doing the right thing. And unfortunately, up until now, government has not done the right thing. And I think that reflects upon the last 40 years. It reflects upon the decisions of government not to address our problem. And while they refuse to address our problem, people die. And while they are still refusing to address our problem, people die. Some of my colleagues in London, when we met in London, some of my colleagues from one of the other contaminated blood groups, charities, they were very distressed because 3 cirrhosis sufferers had died within a week of them coming to that meeting. I met another lady on the group who had, like me, cirrhosis of the liver, who had been tested every 6 months and was now down to 3 months tests. And we had just a conversation as we were moving through Portcullis House to go to the meeting. And she drew the comparison that a friend of hers with a similar problem, with the same problem, had been moved from a 6 month to a 3 month scan. And within 2 weeks she had died. And this lady said, I don't think I'm going to see the end of this inquiry. At least, you know, she has some possibility because England has done something to address the issues. But from an economic point of view, I think it's scandalous that government is incapable of finding the fraction of money that is required to meet parity with England. And I know that that is the case in other countries too. Certainly in Northern Ireland, I'm aware of the figures and I'm aware of the details. I've got freedom of information on that. And it's incomprehensible that the paltry sum could not be found to make the lives of people better during the life of this inquiry. But that's something which government will have to answer for. And I have to say, in the life of this of the existence of this contaminated blood inquiry, and further than that, government have consistently been reluctant and shuffled their feet. And I hope as a consequence of this that will not happen any longer. That's
Simon,
really all I've got to say.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Mr. Williams, who, as you know, represents you, if there's anything else. No, there isn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I have nothing of my own to say, except can I thank you in particular, because plainly you are used to talking about the general subject as chairman of Haemophilia NI, but it's been quite obvious that a lot of your personal testimony, you have struggled on occasion with emotion.
Yes.
Thank you for your courage and bravery and for your testimony. We will take a break now until 25 to 12.
Thank you, sir.
And our next witness is
Danielle Mullen.